Welcome to a new episode of the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Hamza Islam, and this is the first episode of February, and I'm very excited as this week it's the first time I'm talking to someone outside of the United States. My guest this week is Ziyaan Virji, who is the founder and CEO of For The Menstruator, an organization that looks to spread awareness of menstrual equity, and in addition, he is also the host of Leaders of Today. It's an amazing podcast, and I highly recommend that you check his podcast when you get the chance. Ziyaan is someone who, for the past few months, has been very helpful, and I'm probably going to say this in the actual interview, but I feel like he's a brother to me at times because of how much he's been helping me with this podcast. So I'm very excited, and I respect his mentality. He's someone who's very passionate about finding one's purpose in life, and it's a question that I feel that many, or including myself, we don't really know the answer to. And so that's really interesting on his point of view. But his organization For The Menstruator is one of inspiration because he's very passionate about his vision. He's very passionate about spreading awareness of an issue that he will never be directly affected by, but at the same time, he's someone that says, look, this is an issue that is affecting people, and I want to be a part of change. I want to be able to help people. And he's got his journey to helping For The Menstruator has been one of truly an oh my curry goodness moment. And I'm so excited to be talking to him about his journey, about his mindset, about starting today, not tomorrow. And hopefully you guys are able to figure out, and even myself, I'll include this in as well, what our purpose is in life. And so I'm really excited for this conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy my conversation with Ziyaan Virji. Ziyaan Virji, welcome to the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast.
Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to be here, and it's so cool that you are the first international guest of the podcast. Most all of my guests so far have been from the United States, and to have someone outside, I know it's Canada, it's really cool. And I thought of you because it's weird because we just met just 5 minutes ago, and at times I feel like you're like a brother to me, in the sense that you've been so helpful throughout this podcast journey, always giving me advice or opening the door for me whenever I need help. So I really am happy for that you got to join, and I'm so thankful for you.
Likewise, that means a lot. Yeah, I've definitely been following the podcast and all the other interviews, so I'm very excited to be here this week.
So let's talk about really the type of person you are. Obviously, for those who don't know or who do know you, you are the founder and CEO of For The Menstruator, an organization that looks to spread awareness of menstrual equity. But I really want to start with finding your purpose, because your whole life has been that question: what is your purpose in life? And that's something many of us know, like we don't really know how to answer that question, because we're always thought like we should be the best person we can be every day, but we don't really know what that means. And when I think about your story, a lot of it goes down to when I think you were diagnosed with dengue fever and you lost 3 weeks of your life. And when looking back, that moment really propelled you into this journey and becoming the person you are today. And I want to start by talking about how you're able to find your purpose and how you're able to realize that this is the thing that you want to do. And how do you encourage other people to find that, given that it's probably the toughest question we have to answer in our lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. I think you definitely summarized it pretty well there. In my story, um I was never the type of kid that I guess was very intentional about how I live my life. I was just like any other kid, just kind of going with the flow and living life um in the way that I guess like life happened to me. But when I was 15, as you mentioned, I got dengue fever and when I was at boarding school in Kenya, and then I traveled with it to Tanzania one summer. And I won't go into all the details of how it all played out because I'll encourage, I guess, your listeners to go and listen to the full story on Leaders of Today. But to summarize it, I got dengue fever on my last day of school, traveled with it to Tanzania. It took doctors 1 week to figure out it was dengue fever. I was admitted for a week. And from the point of getting discharged up to the next 3 weeks, I went into a phase where I don't really remember anything, but from the stories that I was told, I was basically acting hypersexual and hyperactive. And I was in my conscious state of mind. Um, I wake up 3 weeks later. Last thing I remember was getting discharged from the hospital. And um that really it was really eye-opening for me when I was told that I was gone for like 3 weeks and I don't really remember anything. It really made me have some difficult conversations with myself. Um, I couldn't really understand how and why it all happened. But one thing I did know as I was trying to figure this thing out is that this was a really good reminder for me that our lives are very temporary and we're only here for a short period of time. And that sparked this conversation with myself of what is my purpose and what legacy do I want to leave behind? And if I was on my deathbed today, what is it that I want to be proud of and my legacy on this world? So that really pushed me to have these conversations and become more intentional about how I live my life. And it wasn't something I just woke up and I'm like, okay, this is my purpose in life. It's something I have taken a lot of time to be intentional about, and it's something I question even up to today. And I wouldn't say I have all the answers, but I would say that that is something I I'm more intentional about. So yeah, I think right after that I had the opportunity to go back to school and start up a personal project, and that sparked this journey of me starting my own organization and so forth. And throughout this journey over the last 6 years, um, what's really pushed me and kept me going is the fact that I have this ability and I can truly feel it. And it's something I live by every single day, even through this conversation, is that I want to live a life where I can have an impact on someone's life. And it can be seen as a very privileged thing to do, or a very a thing that in some ways it's a selfless act, but it's selfish in its own way. But I truly think that is what I feel like my purpose is, and that's what has kept me going. So I really encourage all the listeners to think about, what is it for them, right? And a tool and a framework I use to help people figure this out is I talked about it during my TED talk, but it's this idea of ikigai. It's a Japanese concept, and research suggests that ikigai is actually one big factor um of why the Japanese people have such long lifespans, right? Because they live a life of purpose and intentionality. So ikigai is basically this concept that combines your passion, your mission, um, what you can make money with, and what you're good at, all put together, and at the center of it is your ikigai, and ikigai is your purpose. So I highly encourage for people that are trying to figure this out, literally just sit down and break down what all these different things are, and maybe that will be the first step for them, I guess, to start exploring what their purpose is. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And before we talk about your organization For The Menstruator and just the journey that it took for you to get to where it is today, and obviously going into the future, I want to kind of backtrack and talk about what is a menstruator, because I grew up and I don't know if I think you have South Asian background. I think
Yeah.
your mom is from India. It's a topic that people don't talk about as much. And I also, I mean, like you, I'm a college student, and I've asked some of my friends, and we honestly don't know much about it. So
Yeah.
before we talk about your organization, talk to the people in case who don't know much about what menstrual activism is or what a menstruator is. What is that, and why it's important that we spread awareness about this issue?
Yeah. So I guess menstruator is just a term to identify anyone that gets a period. It's a more inclusive term, but basically menstruation in general is a bodily cycle, part of the reproductive system, mostly in the female reproductive system. And it's this idea of, every month, the every 28 days, someone that menstruates gets their period, and it's basically them shedding the lining of their reproductive cycle. I don't want to go to like the scientific details of how the menstrual cycle works because I leave that for like a biology class. But um, yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a very taboo topic because culturally it's in a lot of backgrounds. Historically, it's seen as dirty or bad, but it's actually it's very beautiful, and it's an amazing process, and it's actually the reason why women can give birth, you know what I mean? So it's something that we should embrace. And the reason why we use the term menstruator is it's just a more inclusive term because it's not all women that menstruate, and not all people that menstruate are women. So they're non-binary and transgender folks that do menstruate as well. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and something that I appreciate about you, and I know there are a lot of people who are involved in different forms of activism. There's one group of people that I respect a lot, and it's those who may not be affected directly. I don't think you and, or I don't know if you are ever going to be someone who will be menstruating, but the fact that you are raising awareness to an issue that's not direct, that's never going to direct you effectively, or never going to affect you directly, is inspiring in a way. But for you, oftentimes that can always have some sort of like questioning or caveat, like why are you doing this then? And so for you, how hard is it to convince people that because given that menstruation or period is a women's issue or that will affect mostly women, when men are being involved in this, how hard is it for you to tell people that this issue is not a woman issue, it's a human issue, and that
yeah,
men and women have to be involved in this, not just one group of people?
yeah. I think that's a very good question, and that's something I question every single day. I've been in the space 6 years now, and um, I started this work as not because, as you said, it affects me or it's ever gonna affect me. It's more so or directly affect me, but more so because I was inspired by my mom. So giving you a little bit of insight of what we do. In addition to spreading awareness, a lot of our work is more so helping people get access to menstrual products. Um, Basically, people that menstruate around the world, around 500 million, an average of 1 in 10 menstruators don't have access to products. And what this means is they use old rags, cloth, leaves, blankets, and some of the most unsanitary material when they get their period. I watched this documentary about this issue in India, and that inspired me to have a conversation with my mom about it. And my mom told me that when she grew up in India in a single parent household, there was a point in her life where she didn't have access. I did my research and I found out that uh, I was born and raised in East Africa, and the numbers there were around 65% of the menstruators don't have access to products in East Africa. So that is what really pushed me to start this project. So although it doesn't affect me directly, like it's definitely it ties into my story. It's is part of my mom's story, and that really pushed me in terms of how do I convince people and the challenges that come with being a man working in the space. It's tough, and it's something I question myself. Like it makes me question about why I'm doing this in the first place and what am I really getting out of it. But for me, it's more so I want to have an impact, and I think both male, female, or someone that doesn't identify um with those, it's a human issue in the sense that none of us would be alive if it wasn't for the reproductive cycle, you know what I mean? And it affects us directly and indirectly. This issue has intersectionalities with education, policies like environment, and so many other issues, and it's sort of like a chain effect. So if we don't address this issue, there's so many other issues at stake. um so yeah, for me, it's just so more so how do I how do I make an impact? And I found some purpose working on this issue because my mom was affected by it. Um, and I spent the last 6 years doing that.
I want to tie your organization For The Menstruator and your purpose for this next topic, because when you're starting an organization, you are going to have the mental aspect and the physical aspect. And oftentimes, and I think something we've talked about before this podcast, is that sometimes you have to sacrifice a lot of things to reach your end goal. And
Yeah.
you talked about how you have lost friends because they question your purpose or your vision, or they're like, "Come on, Ziyaan, who wants to participate in this?" And
Yeah.
you talked about how you've also had to sacrifice spending time with your friends. And when I started this podcast, I had this vision of hopefully having this podcast as reaching out to as many people as possible. And I have lost some friends along the way. But when you're going through that process, sometimes it's kind of like I'm quoting Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, where sometimes the hardest sacrifices require the strongest wills, or something along those lines. And for you, how were you able to tell yourself that despite some of the things that you have to lose, it's going to serve a greater purpose going in the future? It's kind of like one of those, if we might lose the battle, but we will win the war. We might lose short term, but long term will be much better. But and it's so much easier said than done. But how do you tell yourself that it's going to be okay at the end of the day?
Yeah. No, it's something it's a great question, and it's something I always think about. Like, at what cost am I willing to work towards my purpose? At what cost? My friends, family, my social life, my body, my physical and mental health. At what cost am I willing to work towards something greater than myself? And my friend last week told me this analogy, and I'm gonna use it. She was telling me that um our lives and working towards our purpose is just like a rocket, right? um and the rocket is always trying to get to a specific destination at the end, right?
Right.
um but when the rocket goes more into the atmosphere, and into space, gradually there are parts of it that slowly leave it, and it's only that one final piece that has like the astronauts in it that finally reach the destination. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy of, when you're working towards your purpose, you're working towards this destination, and you're working towards this thing greater than ourselves. In this analogy, greater than our Earth. You're leaving space, and the more you go into this atmosphere, gradually there'll be, and all these different parts that leave the rocket, they serve a certain purpose for the times that they are with it. But after a certain point, there is so much beauty in embracing that those parts have to leave. They serve a purpose for a certain period of time. There's people that will come and go. There's opportunities that will come and go. There's titles that will come and go. But it takes a lot of power in embracing that you gotta let go of some of these things in order for you to get to where you want to get. And that is how I look at it. And obviously, over the years, I've had to do a lot of work in terms of acknowledging and thinking about what truly do I value, right? And what really matters for my life. And I think over the years, it's taken a lot of trial and error, but I feel like I acknowledge that, your people and your life, your body, your physical and mental well-being, it's not something you want to negotiate, or it should be your priority as much as working towards your purposes. Because if you don't have these certain aspects in your life, you you don't want to be on your deathbed. Yes, you want to be on your deathbed having all that impact, but imagine you're on your deathbed alone. You don't have your friends around you, your family around you. You get to your deathbed early because your physical and mental well-being is not there. So you really have to fill in your own cup of water in order for you to fill other people's cups. And it's a very thin balance of working towards your purpose, but also taking care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't take care of your people and your friends and family, then you won't be able to take care of anyone else. So I guess I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think something that I always emphasize with my podcast is that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey and who the people that follow you and help you become the person you are today. because ultimately you have this goal and you have your vision, but sometimes you will lose a lot of people because of how big your vision is. But at the same time, you will always meet people who understand your why, understand your vision. And like, I give credit to you. There are a lot of people that said no to this podcast, and I could have easily gave up on this, but you said, "Hey, let's set up a time and day and let's do this recording." And obviously that's the mental aspect. But then when I think about the organizational aspect, for the menstruator, you obviously had to spread awareness. And during those early times, like when you're starting a business, you're going to have more things that don't go your way rather than do going your way. And yes, you're spreading awareness to a cause, but I heard a story and I thought this was where there's a saying where if you want it as bad as you can breathe, that's how you know like you're going to be successful. And I read a story once where in order for you to raise money for the menstruator, you had to sell shawarma, where you oftentimes for free because you weren't able to sell these in order to raise funds for your organization because where you're from, and I don't know which country this was, but because you were below the age of 18, you couldn't receive funds from the government. I'd love
Yeah.
for you to talk more about that story and what it was like. Secondly, why
Yeah.
don't you just sell curry instead of shawarma? Because the name of the is called Oh My Curry Goodness. And third, which country was this? I mean, this is like it's one of
Yeah.
those things where some of the things that you don't want to do, you have to do in order to go forward.
Yeah, you're right. So, when I guess when I started off, I went to boarding school in Kenya for 4 years, right? And that's where I started the organization. And at our school, it was very hard to get funding when I started the organization. I go to donors and I go to like, I guess high net worth individuals, ask them for money. They'll be like, "You're a 15-year-old. Like, why are you asking? Like, show, like you haven't done shit. You know what I mean?" So
Yeah,
it was hard to get them. And then government grants or any other sources of funding, like I wasn't able to access them because I was under the age of 18, and the rules at the time is you have to be over 18 to register your organization. So, and I'm also like legally, like I have an Indian passport. I'm an Indian citizen, but I was born and raised in East Africa. So, but because of that, I like legally, I didn't have access to registering. So I had all these issues, but so I was like, okay, let's be creative about this. How do we raise some money for our work? And what I did was shawarmas were really popular in our school. And we'd have all these like events every week, every Friday more so. So what I do is, um, I'd buy shawarmas for $2 and then sell them for $3. And make $1 every shawarma we sell, and every night we would sell around 300, 400 shawarmas, and that's how we'd raise money. And I guess it was really fun, and there were a lot of days where I would buy all these shawarmas and they wouldn't get sold. So the like 200 show at the end of the night, I still have 200 shawarmas remaining, and we literally go to every room and sell them for like 50 cents, just so that we can make something out of them instead of just throwing them away, right? Or giving them away. So, there are definitely a lot of like tough days and a lot of hustles there that I had to go through, but it taught me a lot about, uh just like I guess hustling your way out and grinding your way out, and I honestly loved those moments, and there's such good memories doing that. And then obviously as after I turned 18 and we started growing our organization, now a lot of our sources of funding come from, corporate partnerships, grants, crowd fundraising, and so forth. But those initial early days really taught me this idea of understanding what do people like, how do you sell it to them, and that entrepreneurial spirit really came from there.
right. And oftentimes when you're starting a business, like I said before, I gave it back to you, where you're going to have more things not going your way rather than going your way. And
Yeah,
no matter what your vision is, no matter what your intentions are, it's going to take a journey to get to where you are. And obviously, you talked about like selling shawarmas and what that was like. But I would love to know what particular event it was that really kind of grew your organization to the point where it was like, wow, we're getting noticeable attention. Because there are so many people like you who are waiting for that big break, and
mm.
it may be tomorrow, maybe the next day, may take a long time. But for you, did you realize like this particular moment really took off for the menstruator into the organization that many people now see today and also see it as something that
Yeah.
we're thankful for?
I wouldn't say it was like a particular event, more so. I feel like my whole journey was very gradual. However, I would say where we really started getting noticed and getting a lot of like global attention and PR and so forth was in 2019. Like um I started 2017, and then 2 years just really grinded it out and applied for every opportunity out there, every source of funding, reached out to every organization we could partner with and so forth, and helped as many people as we could. I think we at the time we'd only helped like 300 people in 2 years, right? It just started off. And then in 2019, I had applied for this opportunity in New York called Just Peace Summit. And they basically select like I think 30 to 40 global teen leaders every year to come to New York for a week-long summit and just talk about, you know, their purpose and allow them and teach them different skills, but also bring all these cool people into one space. And I got into that and I was fully funded. And my first time like traveling um for like something that I'm working on. And I think that's really opened my eyes to wow, like it really gave me the belief that this thing is bigger than what I think it is, and I can really make it like a global movement and really push. And I got a lot of inspiration, but also a lot of tools to help me get there and mentorship and so forth. Right after that, I had a chance to go to Dubai. I was invited to pitch at the Global Education and Skills Forum at like the Atlantis Hotel in Dubai, and it was like such a dream to, you know, speak in front of like heads of states and, you know, celebrities and sports like actresses, like all these different people that I've only seen on TV and read about. I was in the same room with them, and that was really a big moment. And then right after I'd come back, like I'd also applied for the Princess Diana Award, and the Princess Diana Award is in the legacy of Princess Diana, but also one of the most prestigious award any young person can win for humanitarian efforts. So I applied for that, and I come back to hear that I won the award. And with that, um, I think a couple like news outlet wrote stories, and then the BBC picked it up. And the BBC, like randomly, I'm going to school, I'm going to class, and I get a call from like the media team at our school, and they're like, we just got a call from BBC. They want to interview you tomorrow. Are you ready for this? Blah blah. And um but they did like a whole short like 3-minute feature or whatever, and that really escalated things to a whole other level. Um and everything happened so quickly. So 2019 was just like one big high after another, and a lot of media, a lot of attention, a lot of people were finding about me. Every other news outlet was covering my story. Then obviously that went on until early 2021, and then COVID hit,
Right.
and and that was a great turning point for me as well, because I realized like it was really nice to get recognized for all the work I'd put in those first 2 years. However, um, I felt like I may have gotten carried away into how much time I was spending doing the actual work that I wanted to do. And it was good to spread awareness and have all these different platforms and speak and talk about solutions and get access to opportunities and people and so forth. But in 2020, it made me realize that that is not the reason why I started this. The reason why I started it is because I want to have an impact on the people that don't have access to products. And those are people that will never see this BBC interview or will never be in those rooms in Dubai and in New York and so forth. So why is it that I started? And that made me evaluate how much time I'm spending on stuff. And from that point onwards, I didn't spend any time on media. I'd get all these requests. I'd say no to it because I really just wanted to focus on building the organization. So pre-COVID, we had only helped 500 people. 2020, our numbers were 8,500 people that we supported. Now we are at almost 20,000 people. So you can see, and one of my big issues, especially in the social impact nonprofit space, it's I've seen a pattern over the years, is a lot of people spend a lot of time in their first couple of years, you know, doing the actual work, but then once they get the media and the attention, they spend a higher proportion of their time doing that kind of stuff versus actually impacting the people that need this the most. And it's obviously it's a required thing and it's important because that's how you raise money and that's how you build and grow and get access to like partnerships and so forth. But it shouldn't be the fundamental thing that you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So having that reflection is what I guess that was the journey. I kind of answered your question and went on, but yeah.
No, and I think first of all, I applaud you for. I think a lot of people, it's there's a difference between being famous and being what and remembering what you're known for. I mean, don't get me wrong, being recognized like the being awarded the Princess Diana Award is a huge honor. And I think sometimes, and like you said, people care more about that award and then they stop what they're doing. But you're someone that's like, yeah, we did all this, but there's still more to go. And before I change topics, I want to talk about you mentioned how you started save helping like I think 500 people in
Yeah.
2019, and then here you are helping thousands of people. I would love to know whether it's about whether like what's next for the menstruator, like what is your ultimate ideal goal? Because I know that's something that, like you said, you're not going to just stop. You're going to continue to go forward until
Yeah.
you're on your deathbed.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say over the last 6 years, um, my going back to the very first question of what is purpose to me, and for me, purpose has always been about having an impact on someone's life, right? And so more recently, I've had to think a lot about what form that takes, and for the menstruator is still continuing, and we have an amazing team of over 100 volunteers in all these different countries around the world. um However, my involvement with for the menstruator, I've definitely more recently taken a couple of steps back. I think for me, I've seen and understood and thought about what this space looks like. But I think in order for this organization to take its next step, it may have to be without me. So I'm still involved and I still do a lot of work with it, but my involvement is not the same anymore. And right now, um, I'm I think the nonprofit model has its issues, and because you're always dependent on external funding. So I haven't really shared this anywhere, but I'm currently building a company that allows me to truly make that impact and address some of those issues in the nonprofit space, but also be sustainable and make systematic impact. And I hope to like launch over the summer. And I won't give too much detail about it, but that's what I'm building right now, and that's really me working towards that purpose and seeing actualizing that on a higher scale. And at the same time, and I'm sure this is probably your next question, but whilst I'm going through this transition phase, I'm also really tapping into my story, and I feel like I've had access to all these really cool guests and people throughout my journey. And I've always loved storytelling. So I obviously started my own podcast called Leaders of Today, and it's basically a gift to my 15-year-old self, that of because I never had that when I started. So I really feel like I want to help empower the next generation of leaders, and help people find their purpose through the podcast.
Yeah, no, and I encourage anyone who is listening to this after you listen to this episode, feel free to listen to Zion's podcast, Leaders of Today. And I listened to the first couple of episodes and I loved it. And I'm not saying because you're here. I'm saying it because there are moments where when I'm listening, whether it's your like the first episode in which you talked about your life or with your guests, I'm trying to envision myself being that person. So it's like, okay, if I think like I think you had one guest where he talked about how he dropped out of high school. So I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, imagine myself dropping out of high school and trying to live this journey. And I think you and and I'd love for you to add more to this. When we are talking about our life, it's so much easier to talk about it than experience it. And I know that's kind of like no dip Sherlock kind of thing, but whether it's going through 3 weeks of being diagnosed with dengue fever, or dropping out of high school to pursue your passion or your talents, or like how you when you were trying to raise funds for your organization selling shawarma, like those things are so much easier to talk about. But I'd love for you to talk about how, like, when you want to get to a better place, when you want to get a and it kind of goes back to that question about the shawarma thing, like you really have to work, like you have to accept that this is going to take a long journey. We can always look back and say like we went through this and that will take what 1 or 2 minutes to talk about, but at the end of the day that journey took 3 weeks, 1 year, 2 years, and that's something that people don't understand, and oftentimes I don't myself.
Yeah, no, it's definitely very difficult. Like, and I'm not saying I've figured this out or it's something I figured. Like, I still deal with insecurities, and I still deal with like, yo, like, why am I even doing this in the first place? Like, will I actually get there? Like, especially on days where you don't see the results and outcomes or get that validation. Um, but fundamentally, like, it truly comes down to why you're doing it in the first place. And if you're confident and self-aware about why exactly you're doing this, and you solely just work towards that why, um, it makes it easier, and it gives you a reason to wake up every other day, especially on those dark, gloomy, snowy days. You know what I mean? Like, it gives you it gives you that push and that purpose, because you know why you're doing what you're doing. But if you're doing it for reasons, and what I've seen over my journey is, and I sort of also mentioned this on my TED Talk, is if you when you work towards your why and you fully focus on it without caring about numbers, results, outcomes, media, validation, any of this, money, all of these external things, the universe somehow acknowledges that you're working towards your why and rewards you all of this other additional things. However, if you work towards the money, the fame, the numbers, and all of those, it has the opposite effect, and you don't know your why, and then you have all this, you struggle so much, you know what I mean? And you in most that's why 90% of entrepreneurs fail, you know what I mean? Because they get into it for the wrong reasons. And they don't have that self-belief to get to that final day right before, that turning point and that big moment. So you really just have to work in silence, just work towards putting the actual work, when no one is acknowledging it, when no one is there to listen, when no one is there giving you that validation. And if with consistency, um you you will get there. It's inevitable for you to get there because you're putting in the work, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's obviously easier said than done, but yeah, I don't know.
Right. And one advice you've always told me, and it's something that you have said in many interviews, podcasts, articles, is start today, not tomorrow. Start whatever it is you're passionate about, you do it right now because you don't want to be in a situation where you either tomorrow, the next week, whatever, whenever you're planning on it, you don't get to it because you've been procrastinating or slacking off or just putting it off because you don't have that self-belief. And kind of like how you talked about how so many people today care about the numbers, the results, the success, but not because of the journey. And that's what holds people back. But I want to talk about what, obviously, I think a lot of people will say that, like, yes, we start today, don't wait, whenever, do it right now, or do it as soon as possible. But I want to know what that quote, start today, not tomorrow, means to you personally.
Yeah, so that sparks from my grade 3 teacher. I used to submit my homework late all the time, and I would tell my teacher, yo, I'll submit it tomorrow, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she would always tell me, Ziyaan, tomorrow never comes. And over the years, I never really like thought about that. Like, I kind of forgot about that memory, but it somehow stuck in my head, because I submitted my homework late a couple of times and she kept saying it. Um, so yeah, tomorrow never comes. Like, if you have an idea, if you have a passion, if you have something that you want to work towards, you literally have to start today. Because tomorrow will always turn into day after tomorrow, and then next week, and then next month, and then next year, and honestly, you'll never ever that it will never come, and you like a lot of people have an idea and they'll be like, oh, I will do this when I get to university. And then when they're in university, they'll be like, I'll do this when I graduate and I have a job. And then when they're in their job, they'll be like, I'll do this when I get my next promotion. And then by the time you know you're already retired, and you're almost close to your deathbed, and you're like, shit, what life have I lived? There's actually research um done on like conversations with people that are on their deathbed or are almost dying, and for them that's your biggest regret, like not doing what they were really passionate about and somehow just letting life happen to them, you know what I mean?
Right.
I also want to refer to this quote that says the person that loves walking will walk further than the person that loves the destination. And it's as simple as that. Like the person that loves the destination, okay, they somehow may get to the destination, but the person that loves walking is just walking, and they'll continue walking no matter what, even once the destination is reached, and they'll reach heights that they've never seen before. So to what you were saying about, focusing on every day and the process versus an ideal outcome, like just think about that. Do you really love what you're doing every day? And if you're connected to that why, and it's deep in your foundation, in your heart, like that is what really matters, right? And that's what you should work towards.
The final thing I want to add or want to talk about before I let you go is you've lived a life of tragedy in the sense that you were diagnosed with dengue fever. You've lived a life of hope because you're able to figure out a way to kind of find yourself. You've lived a life of inspiration. You've inspired so many people. And here, all these three elements, and there obviously could be more, but these three major elements have led you to finding your purpose. And here you are today talking to me. But I would love to ask you if you went on a time machine and you went back and you met yourself when you're 13, when you or 15, when you were diagnosed with dengue fever, or when you first started for the menstruator, what would you tell that Ziyaan Virji in hopes that this person will realize that at kind of like when we talked about how do you know if it's going to be okay? What would you tell him if you went and met you in the past?
Oh, that's tough. I'd probably just tell him that, you know, life is short, and yes, like work towards your purpose and do whatever you're gonna end up doing, but make sure to, smell the flowers when you are in the garden. Make sure to embrace the highs and the lows, and don't be too hard on yourself, and really cherish the memories, the people that you met, the people in your life, your family, and don't take things for granted. um we obviously didn't get an opportunity to share this, but I do have to say, as much as I've lived a life of, tragedy and inspiration and impact and purpose and so forth, I'm nowhere close to being perfect, and I've made a lot of mistakes, and I do have a lot of regrets. And I do have a lot of work to do as a person, and I'm on my own journey figuring things out, and most people are on their own journey. Um but really taking the time to just be grateful and embrace every single day, even when it's a dark day or even when it's an amazing day. Just embracing the day, smelling the flowers, um, enjoying the opportunities, and really taking care of yourself and the people around you. Um, yeah, that's what I have to say, and that's what I tell my 13-year-old, 15-year-old self.
If there's anything I've learned from this podcast or from this episode is that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Start today, not tomorrow. Don't worry about the results. And that you are going to lose a lot of friends when you have a vision and you have a vision that's going to inspire a lot of people. But it's okay because at the end of the day, you're going to meet people that will add more value to your life than those friends you lost. And I got to tell you, I enjoy talking to you. We could talk for hours, but um, obviously we don't have that time. But thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for being an amazing friend. And I'm very excited to see how For the Menstruator goes, how Leaders of Today, the podcast goes. I'm a fan. I'm a subscriber, and I can't wait to see what's next for you in the future with your organ or with your company in the summer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You have an amazing one. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm definitely very grateful to have this platform.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever. And also, if you have social media, particularly Instagram, feel free to follow us at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, guest clips, and more information about who we're talking to during each month. We normally announce our guests 1 month in advance, and so it's a really good way for you to figure out who I'm talking to. And I'm looking forward to more episodes in the future. Thank you guys so much for being a supporter, and I hope you guys have a great week.